All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of the workshop. Yesterday, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Yesterday, we went over a few different things, including various methods with which to produce text-based images. I'm just going to go over a few. Um, for anybody following along here on YouTube, I highly encourage you guys to open up the drive and submit whatever image pairings that you have. We'll go through a few of these and talk about them. Generally, the text prompts, I would prefer them to be facade-based, because if we're doing sort of a taxonomy of objects like after this, I think it would be really cool to have like a comparative study just of the 3D objects produced. So this one's looking pretty good. And the depth map also looks pretty detailed. So with the two options produced in the original colab script that I sent you guys, generally the LERES produces better results. However, they are inverted compared to the MIDAS, which I sort of just found out. That just means we'll have to adjust one parameter in the Houdini script depending on whichever depth map that you guys found preferable. We'll just walk through a few more of these guys. Yeah, a few of these are looking really good. And we discussed a little bit yesterday the criteria with which to select these. And I hope that as you guys generated more images, you were able to see the types of images that lent themselves better to to getting a more detailed displacement. And another one of the criteria that I had discussed was generating images that begin to break the boundary of the cube. This one's a really awesome example. It has a figure that's discernible that we can then go in and subject select. One problem that often arises in these three-dimensionalization techniques, as they are image-based, is that the trace of the original aspect ratio of the image is super apparent. So you get these weird corners in the 3D objects that, generally speaking, you wouldn't really get in an object that you would model. So it looks like the majority of you guys have uploaded some pretty awesome image pairings. These look really great. We're gonna first open up Houdini, and I'm gonna show you guys the location of the original Houdini file here. So if you go into Digital Futures 2022, Houdini files, go ahead and download this. And I'm going to do it myself as well, just to see how much time generally it takes so I can get the pacing right on this. And just give me thumbs up when you guys have gotten to a good point where your Houdini is open. I'm assuming you guys either have student versions of Houdini or Houdini Apprentice. That this workflow is completely compatible with any version of Houdini that you're going to be using. It's a relatively simple script, but I'm going to break it down to you guys node by node, as well as giving you like a general interface of Houdini. So give me some thumbs up or hand raises when you guys are at this part.
Shane, one question. Is it hard to get into Houdini? I remember you said your brother was into it. So I'm just assuming you got some cool knowledge. Like, how easy is it?
That's a really good question. So like I took a studio with Barry Work. He's like a pretty awesome Houdini guy. Not just Houdini guy, but person who uses Houdini. And he always says, like, even within like the fields of visualization, and architecture. Any given Houdini user really only will ever need to know around 10% of the software. And I can confidently say I probably know around 2%, maybe 3% of the like actual capabilities of the software. But depending on what you're using it for, like whether it be like Vdb operations or agent-based stuff, it'll really differ. The general tool set that I like teaching will take maybe a day to understand, and then to implement it takes, you know, a semester. But generally what I like teaching doesn't take too long to understand. It is relatively comparable to like the same actions that you're going to be doing in Rhino or Grasshopper. It's just a lot more efficient. Yeah. The interface is a little weird. It's like a combination of Grasshopper and Maya or something. But you should have your parameters here, your nodes down here in the bottom right, and then your object view here. The only real thing that like you might get a little bit messed up on just in the general user interface is you might have on this tool panel here, you might have something different selected by default other than the camera. A way to check that is, say if I'm here, right, it doesn't really work. Like my pan and dolly don't work. So I just press Alt and that will allow me to pan around and everything. But for now, all you need to know is have the camera tool selected, pan around with your middle mouse, rotate with left mouse button, and that's just about everything you'll really need to do. And of course, zooming in and out is the scroll wheel. But yeah, is everybody at this spot here?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to break down node by node what this script does and also where to input your images. The very first node of the script, it should be the one highlighted by default, but if not, all you'll need to do is in this node editor here, scroll into the very first node and click this blue visualization ribbon. And this will display the grid. And you can see it has 1,000 subdivisions on either side. You can change this if you want even more like high resolution meshes, but generally speaking, you won't need to go above 1,000 by 1,000. Now this just establishes the square grid with which we're gonna project the images onto. Another just general user interface with Houdini is when you click on the center of each node, you'll get the parameters that go along with that node. So I'm able to, in real time, adjust the amount of rows and columns, as well as the size of the original grid. There's no reason to in this specific script, but just generally speaking, you click in the center of each node when you want to adjust the parameters of said node. So the next step will be to import your massing image, so the image produced by the monocular depth estimation. That, in my case, is in my downloads folder called, sometimes Colab just outputs sort of random letters and numbers, so it's a little bit difficult to find. So I have a relatively messy downloads folder. But it should also be noted that this image was produced by Jamie Respondek, a future classmate of mine at Penn, and she took the class that I co-taught with Gabe Esquivel. Really awesome student, and look out for her. The reason I'm using this specific image to three-dimensionalize is, for one, it matches some of the criteria. You can see an inherent depth to the image, but also a lot of the graffiti and calligraphy on the building facade and image is white, which lends itself really well to the actual displacement method that we're going to be using. So let's get back to the script. I'm going to go ahead and click on displacement massing and open floating file chooser here, and that will open my file explorer. Houdini kind of has a bit of a weird interface for the file explorer, but it's the exact same as what you're used to. It's just things are slightly moved around. Go into downloads or wherever you have your image saved out on. Select the image that you produced through the depth estimation portion of this. Hit accept. And then when you visualize the node, you will see it projected onto the grid. Susanna, do you have a question?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't know my.
You're all good. Don't worry about it. Okay, is everybody here? Yeah.
I think we're all here. Thank you.
So from there, this attribute wrangle is just a little bit of Vex code that there's no need to explain the ins and outs of like creating Vex expressions. But within this node here, there's just a little line of code that I wrote that says, okay, so for every face or vertex of this, analyze it to see its black and white value and multiply that black and white value by this P scale right here. So this is what I was mentioning earlier. This will then displace the image. But depending on whether you got your displacement image from MIDAS v2 or LERES, you'll have to either make the scale positive or negative. So you just do that by scrolling down, having the scale parameter here, and this will produce the inverse of it if it's positive, the original version of it if it's negative. You can also control with this parameter the amount that you want it to be displaced. So maybe I want it a little bit more shallow. I'll just press 2. I get a little bit more shallow. 4 will give me a little bit more depth here. I'm going to stick with the original, which I think was around 0.3. And you should see a very basic displaced image or displaced plane, right? Since it is sort of the massing displacement, as it's called here, it doesn't pick up on all of the details. So for that reason, we're going to project the original image back onto it and displace the plane again slightly from the original image with all the details on it. So again, I'm going to go click on attribute from map. So like click on the center of this, click on open floating file chooser. And here you're going to click on your original image. It helps sometimes to just pull up your file explorer just to match the names up. So I know this is 0020. If I hit accept and visualize, I'll then see the image reprojected onto the displaced plane, right? So again, Jamie Respondec's image really works well specifically because of this secondary displacement that we're going to be doing that picks up on the details of the image. So all this is doing is analyzing the black and white values of the original image and displacing it slightly more. So there's not really an exact science to the amount with which you displace it, right? Only if there's, say, like additional articulation that you're not getting with the massing displacement, say like some brick and mortar elements, then you'll want to recede it just ever so slightly, and you can change that with the scale here. So if I want to double this displacement, right? And then there comes something called like that I call displacement trace. So it's like any sort of digital trace can be described as like how you can see like the origin or what an object was created with. So like you have Houdini trace, grasshopper trace. The ultimate goal of this is to not be able to tell that this was produced specifically through displacement, which we'll sort of get to later in the script. But just play around a little bit with the scale attribute to see how much you want to displace the grid by. So this one seems a little bit too much, so I'm going to back it down to 0.1. And that looks just about right. Now, the node right after this is a smooth node. It works the exact same as a smooth node in Rhino or Maya would, or a smooth command. It will just smooth out a lot of the edges. Now, I always find it super impressive the level of detail and articulation you're able to get specifically with this. And even if you don't use this script as a sort of end to the workflow, which in my opinion you really shouldn't, it will give you a significant amount of geometry to work off of. And then finally, the extrude volume node here will extrude this plane all the way down. If you click on flatten base, it will give you, it will extrude it down all the way to a plane. So essentially you can think of it as this surface lofting to a flat plane that's controlled with this depth. Now, in certain instances, like facades don't really work like that. You have a specific depth that you're wanting to go to. So I'll show you guys really quickly. If I change it to 0.1 and I don't check flatten base, you'll see that the lower surface here is just an inverse of the top surface, meaning it took this top surface down and lofted all of the edges down. So now you'll see a fully displaced object here. Now, depending on your image and your preferences, you'll choose whether or not you want to flatten the base. I, generally speaking, don't like just objects that look like they're offset from one another. So I'm just going to flatten the base on this one. There are other images that lend themselves a little bit better to the non-flattened base, but those are just my 2 cents on that. And from here, this is where sort of the Houdini portion pauses temporarily. And what you're going to do is go ahead and open up Photoshop. And you'll see I have a few, that's me, sorry. You'll see I have a few different masks, but go ahead and open up your image. So your original image here. Now this step can be replaced with the pix-to-pix that does semantic segmentation or a subject selection. In this case, I want to maybe insert my agency a little bit more and have a little bit more control over what gets masked in or masked out. So all we're going to be doing here is selecting a figure of the image. A great way to start is selecting the subject. It's Photoshop's AI just analyzing what the subject is within the image. It's super good for like taking, like selecting like a person out of background, but also for this workflow, it works really well. So you don't have to go in and use the like polygon and magnetic lassoing tool to extract these figures. But let's say I don't want just this to be the 3D object. I want to include some of this ground articulation that's going on. I will, generally speaking, the magnetic lassoing tool works pretty well for this. I'll hit Shift and drag along wherever I want it in order to add some of this stuff to my selection here. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So you can see I have this selected. And then another thing that you might want to start doing is if you have any windows within your facade or doors or other sorts of apertures, you can also subtract out those. You can use the magnetic lasso tool or just the magic wand tool. I'll have one or two that I want to subtract out of this. And this will give your object just a little bit more porosity. Let's say maybe this one as well. So of course, when you're doing this, you are the person that like determines how much or how little of the image that you want. But the criteria again that I look for is, is it clear that it didn't exactly come from a frame, and does it make sense, the selection that I have relative to its background? If there's anything interesting in the background, maybe I can do an additional mask later to include that as a secondary object. But for now, let's go ahead and edit, fill all of this with black, right? And then if you select inverse, so select inverse or Shift Control I, you can edit, fill everything with white. Now, the Houdini script will actually allow you to, like, it's variable. You can either have the mask be black and the background be white. Just because it's a Boolean operation, you can do whichever. But as long as you have your figure selected and your background a different color, then you're completely fine. And go ahead and file, export. You can just do a quick export as a PNG, and I'm going to name it mask.
Hey, Shane?
Yep, what's up?
Yeah, sorry, I missed the fill part. Sorry.
Oh, that's all good. Let me undo a few steps. You got the selection?
Yeah.
So all you have to do is edit, fill with black for the subject, and then Shift Control I or select inverse.
Right.
And then fill with white. So all you're doing, oh, sorry, I didn't. There we go. So all you're doing is just making a black and white mask of the object that you want to select.
Right, got it. Good, thanks.
Yeah, of course. Okay, and now here comes the really cool part in Houdini, where you can actually go in and there's a trace node. So this should also be noted. I included in the script here, if you want to do a little bit more of an advanced version with a segmentation map that has specific colors on it, you have an additional COP network that you can import your file into and do a chroma key. So that's only if you have multiple colors that you're trying to select rather than just a black and white image. But the trace node works perfectly fine with just a file that's black and white. So once again, open the floating file chooser, go into downloads or wherever you have it saved. Click on the mask. The one thing that you might want to consider when choosing this, if you have a bunch of image sequences that you don't want, which let me see if they generally highlight in yellow. Just uncheck show sequences as one entry. A lot of the time that's what will mess you up, and then all of a sudden you'll change your like your timeline just arbitrarily, and it'll produce a completely different image. Just make sure you have that unchecked. Now that being said, you can actually, if you have an image sequence that you want to three-dimensionalize with this same technique, you're able to fully just import that as an image sequence and have it variable based off of the timeline. But for now, let's just go into the trace node, and you can see that it does a pretty good job of tracing out the figure from which you just had the black and white image of. It does a pretty good job of this if you just have a like highly contrasted image. It's able to trace out specific details of it. But just as a mask, it works super, super well. From there, these next few nodes just extrude the volume, transform the volume, and like it transforms it to where it's on the XY plane rather than the XZ plane or YZ plane. I'm not sure which one it was originally on. Now this should work for all of you. And then when you, the next node is a Vdb from Polygons, which I'm going to discuss in a little bit more detail later. But when you visualize the overlap here, you're able to see the original geometry and your mask, so you can just make sure that they're overlapping in the right way. Right. So a little bit about Vdb from Polygons, as we were discussing sort of in light detail yesterday. So let me go back to my extrude volume here. Right. If you zoom in really close on this, you can see the original sort of mesh from which it came from. So it has faces and vertices. But as soon as I convert it into a Vdb from Polygons, instead of that, you'll actually see a voxel grid that approximates the mesh, right? So as long as you have a closed mesh in Houdini, you're able to convert it into what's called a Vdb, which is just Houdini's native way of storing geometry super efficiently. If you zoom in onto the object itself, you're able to see all of these squares that when you zoom out, just approximate the entire mesh. This essentially, you can think of it as a like three-dimensional Cartesian grid of points, right? And if a point is within the original closed mesh, then it assigns it to be a voxel, and if not, it assigns it to not be a voxel. So this is super effective for like Boolean operations, offsetting operations, just because rather than having to calculate like the actual topology of the mesh, all it has to do is like, it just sees it as a bunch of ones and zeros and will just Boolean out super effectively. So that's what I'm going to show you guys here with this trace node. So you have the trace, extrude volume, transform, you convert the Vdb, you convert the mesh into a Vdb, and then finally you have what's called a Vdb combine. So this Vdb combine node actually hosts all of the different Vdb operations within its parameters. So you have operation, union, intersection, and difference. These are the only ones that are really gonna matter. Primarily intersection and difference, so SDF intersection and SDF difference. If I visualize this combined node, I can see now that I have the figure extracted and the actual object is without the original frame. Whereas if I do a VDB difference, you just get the frame of the object itself. And just for fun, I'll show you guys a few different VDB operations you can do with the object, right? So, but before I do that, actually, the last thing that you need to know about VDBs is the voxel size. All the voxel size is the spacing within that sort of imaginary Cartesian grid. It just makes the voxels bigger or smaller. So if I do like 0.005, you can see the size of these squares gets a lot bigger and the resolution of the mesh gets a lot worse. So if I go back to, how is it, 2. And since I have a sort of nice build with me right now, I'll bring it all the way down to 0.001. So that way you get just all of the resolution of the original mesh there. So that looks pretty nice. You have a lot of different VDB operations that you can do. You guys don't have to follow along with this portion, but Vdb Reshape actually allows you to either dilate or erode the mesh. So say I wanted this mesh to be offset inwards slightly, get a little bit more of this kind of articulation, with it still matching the original projected image onto it. It would look something like this. If I wanted to make it a little bit fatter, I would dilate it. And once again, it just offsets each of the voxels to give it a little bit more like just offsets it relative to the voxel itself. So it can calculate really fast. And if you imagine in Rhino, if you had this as a surface or a mesh and you tried an offset surface on this, just imagine the horrible topology of that. And if you go ahead and convert now, you can see the mesh is actually super nice and it's dynameshed as well. That's not the actual term for it, but just to use ZBrush terminology, it has all of the nice squares and you don't have any sort of messy mesh topology. And then the very last note here will be a reprojecting your image onto it. So that is the wrong image. So I'm just going to do, should be 20. I see. So if you, it will scale it to the extent of whatever image that you have. This is just a visualization technique, so we're not going to actually do this. So it's just a visualization technique in Houdini. We're going to reproject it in Keyshot anyway. So let's just go ahead and save out the convert node for now. The reason it's showing up slightly distorted is purely because it doesn't have 2 reference points to scale it from. So if, for example, if you have the entire width or the entire height, it will scale it to match that, which then allows it to just be projected at its original scale. But we're going to have to reproject it in Keyshot anyway, so it's all good. Okay, so is everybody at this point?
No, I'm still having trouble with the alpha thing. I thought I had it, but now it's. But I understood everything after the alpha, so I'm just trying to get the alpha out, and I'll eventually get there.
Okay, so I think now is a good time to open it up for questions then. whether it be in the panel or otherwise.
Sh
I didn't quite catch that. Does anybody have any questions? I think now's a good time to do a sort of Q&A in the panel. Oh man, my screen is freezing a lot.
It seems okay
Oh,
for.
yeah, so yeah, everybody, yeah.
It seems okay.
It's just me. Yeah, it's just me.
Okay, that's good to hear.
But I'm keeping up with what you're speaking to, so it's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Shane, I had just a quick question, and maybe for our audience. When you talk about Houdini and its voxel based, geometric logic versus Rhino's based, seems like surface logic.
Mhm.
That's why we're in this software, because it actually gives a certain different power.
Exactly.
But how do you think about it as an architect and a designer? Like, how do you dream about it or scheme to make things better with this program? Like, what's the difference between you using Rhino versus you using Houdini?
Yeah, so there's like with Rhino, I would say you have a lot more manual agency than Houdini. I seldom ever like actually manually manipulate any object in Houdini. Um, I just view it a lot more as a tool with which to do Boolean operations, to do erosion and shelling operations, just stuff that Rhino struggles with at the moment. I think with plugins for Grasshopper like Jellyfish, it's like approaching a decent point, but like there's some things that I think still need to be worked out with the pipeline between Rhino and Houdini. But that being said, I don't think I'm ever going to do just like a project that's exclusively in Houdini, like that's specific to architecture. I think all it really does is give you an additional tool with which to produce a project.
Thank you, Shane.
Yeah, of course.
All right, one last question for me.
Yeah, of course.
I got the alpha map, but when I put it in Houdini, it's taking, like, it's still recognizing the contour, and it's like, because I put it black, right? Like you put the object black, the subject. And so now I'm just seeing the outline of the subject and not the actual subject.
Okay, that's all good. And sort of that's what the script is built for. All you'll need to do in the VDB combine here is just, rather than doing an SDF intersection, do a SDF difference.
Okay. Okay, it works. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And yeah, and that's one of the reasons I love Houdini so much, is like, especially in this sort of setting, the amount of troubleshooting that I'd have to do if this was like a Rhino based operation would be pretty insane.
Shane, about Gustavo's question about the differences between Rhino and Houdini. I was wondering how can you like make a connection with them? Can you export objects from here? I know you can import from Rhino OBJ formats, but is there any? Can you actually convert it to some? For example, your code, you have like this like visual programming stuff on your right corner. Can you export it to Grasshopper, for instance, or anything like that? Because I use a lot Rhino and Grasshopper, and I'm not used to Houdini, but it would be great if I could like work with both of them since they are like complementary.
Yeah, no, totally. So the pipeline between Rhino and Houdini like isn't exactly like super resolved, but you are able to um, just with a file node import any OBJ or STL that you save out from Rhino and just bring it into the Houdini interface. And then what I'm going to show you guys in just a second is how to export these meshes, and then you can bring it back out into Rhino or any other software. Now, it should be noted also that Houdini by default exports .bgo files, which is, in my opinion, pretty dumb because like one of the only softwares that can read those files is Houdini. But you can just set it to export OBJs instead.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Do you think actually, do you think the visual programming stuff in Houdini is close to Grasshopper? Just by like looking at it, looks like some of the components that we have on Grasshopper, but not so much, right?
Yeah, no, I'm also like a really big fan of Grasshopper. Like I use it probably every day. Uh, so the overlap and maybe not necessarily in the specific nodes, but just in the logic of it is super similar. So like jumping from maybe like Rhino to Houdini would be a little bit steep, but something like Grasshopper or Dynamo or sort of nodes in Blender to Houdini, it's a lot less of a learning curve.
Good news then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I think in this regard, it would be very good if you can just tell me an overview because me myself, I'm new to Houdini.
Mhm.
So if you just tell us a little bit about the definition and the components, like those blue marks that you open and it's like on or off, or just some simple things about the Houdini overall.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I sort of like glazed over the basic user interface. You have your display port, your parameters tab, and the most important thing, in my opinion, is this here and understanding the logic. So very similarly to Grasshopper, you have nodes that you just connect. Now within those nodes, you can click on them and your parameters are opened, but you have a few options. The first of which being just a visualization on the far right. But you can also, and this is super powerful in terms of actually like, let's say sharing scripts and stuff, you can also freeze nodes that, and this allows you to do two things. One of which being alter the nodes before it without having anything after it change. But it also works the same as a internalized geometry in Grasshopper, where if you save this file, now it comes with whatever files are within the frozen node embedded into the Houdini file. So that's really awesome. Say if you wanted to transfer this to your different computer, all you would need to save out is freeze this displacement massing and freeze the detailed image as well. And now you can transfer it to any computer with the data internalized. Another pretty awesome one that I sort of didn't mention at all. These two nodes are bypassed, right? Bypassing a node just essentially makes it completely null to like whatever is operating on it. So like you have a VDB from Polygons and then a transform node that doesn't do anything. Now the transform node I included in here just in case anybody has a different aspect ratio of an image, right? So say I had something like a 1920 by 1080 image, all I would need to do is divide 1920 by 1080 and input it in this scale factor here. And then I would have the original aspect ratio of the image to Boolean from. So this is to be used just like for images that aren't direct outputs from the like 512 by 512 or 1024 by 1024 neural nets. And then this Vdb Reshape, for example, that I'm also bypassing here, allows you to actually, you'll go into this here and say, I actually want to offset that selection ever so slightly, right? So say I will unbypass it and it will offset the surface by however much. And now when I VDB combine it, it will include a little bit more of the boundary. The other awesome thing about Houdini is that it will update in real time. So if you say offset by a factor of 5 now instead, you can see even more of the object being selected, which in my opinion is pretty cool. And you know, it's not the best looking, but maybe for now, just so I can show you guys, you can see it clipping into the original extents of the image here, which will then mean I'm able to visualize with any luck. Yeah, it's a little bit closer to the original projection. Now, it doesn't really matter because we're reprojecting it. It was just to sort of show you guys. And then when I, once again, bypass this, right, it will show back up as just the original image, or the original selection of the image. Is that all good?
Cool, thank you. Thank you so much. I can get a hang of it much more easily. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, any more questions?
Shane, there was one question from YouTube. I sent it to you in the chat if you want to read it.
When is Shane? How long is it? Oh yeah, the drive link will stay open indefinitely. Same with the GANS 2 to 3D folder. I plan on making the actual video at some point this week. And yeah, another thing that should be noted, if you look at this just as a like an object to be fabricated, or even 3D printed, specifically fabricated though, you can see if like you want to put this in your CAM software right now, it will literally need no undercuts, and you can just run like a few parallel finishing passes over it and just produce it as is, which I think is really awesome. And like y'all feel completely free to use this workflow for any of your applications, but I do really want you guys to send whatever you guys do with it to me, because I'm really excited to see what like the results of this will produce. So just like DM me whatever you produce with this on Instagram, and I'd love to see some of these objects get printed or CNC'd.
Can you share your Instagram handle with us as well, so that all the students and YouTube people can follow you and share their progress?
Of course, yeah. Yeah. There we go. And also stay tuned for more updates with different workflows. There's some pretty cool things that I'm working on right now that I'm really excited to show you guys on Instagram. But yeah, okay, so now we have the object that has been produced. All you need to do to save it out is just right click, save geometry. And then you have this save geometry node, or not node, but sort of pop up here. All you need to do is click on the floating file explorer, click on where you want to save it to, name it, hit accept, and before you hit accept on this, make sure that it's an OBJ. A lot of you guys will have it default to BGO, which is just super annoying because whenever you like export something, it takes a long time, and then you try to open it up in another software, and it's just not anything. It's super frustrating, but yeah, that's just sort of a rant on that. But yeah, just .obj file. You can also do .stl or whatever preferred way you like to store your 3D data. And go ahead and open up Keyshot now. This is one of the other experiments that I was doing with this. So you guys might recognize this object as one of them produced from yesterday because it is. I think it worked pretty well, but I'll just go forward with the object that we produced so you guys can see my basic sort of rendering setup that I like doing with these things. In fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and close Keyshot here and open it up again, just so I can start at the same point you guys are starting. So I'm going to wait for just a second for everybody to open up Keyshot.
Shane?
Everybody all good? Could I get a thumbs up?
Yeah, actually, I didn't know you had to download this. What is Keyshot exactly?
Oh, yeah, the Keyshot is just a rendering software. So you can actually open this up in whatever rendering software or Rhino, just whatever you're the most used to. This is just sort of specific to people that wanted to render their objects in Keyshot. But I mean, feel free to use V-Ray or putting these objects in Unreal is actually really cool as well.
Oh, thank you. I'll make sure to do that.
Sorry? Oh, okay.
No, I'm just thanking you. Thank you.
Also, my speaker isn't super great, so I'm like having to sort of listen to my monitor as you guys are asking questions. So for those of you guys that are new to Keyshot, the basic interface is if your workspace is set to default, you'll see your materials library, your camera, and material, graphs, scene, environment, lighting, and the image style that you want to do, as well as your sort of basic toolbar down here that includes some rendering preferences. Go ahead and open up your object. Everything should be fine just by default. And you can now see this is rendering in pretty nice fidelity. So like we're going to be focusing on like reprojecting the image onto it, but the object in and of itself just produced through this workflow it's pretty nice. So without any, if you think of it again in like sort of the fabrication scope of things, even without doing like hydro dipping or vacuum forming or projection mapping onto it, you can read the original object pretty well within this. Let's see. So go ahead and select the object. You can do that through two ways. You can just select it in your scene view or double click on it here. Click on Tools and Move Tool, and go ahead and rotate it 90 degrees so it's sort of perpendicular to the ground plane here. And you can move it up a little bit as well, so the bottom of it matches the ground shadows. Go ahead and hit OK. Now, all you'll need to do now is reproject the material onto it. But if you have some sort of pre-existing material setup that you want on it, you can go ahead and just like drag and drop. I think this looks kind of dumb, but if y'all have some really cool materials that you want to apply to it, that would be really cool. But for the most part, let me reapply the default material onto it. Go back into your material graph here, double click on the default material and open up the graph. So you can see here that you have your object and a basic diffuse and your default material. You have the option to sort of change the color of it here, but in this case, we're going to click on this color texture and open it up. Now you'll see a few things wrong with this, right? If your material stays true to the projection, or sorry, if it stays true to at least two corners of the original image, it will automatically sort of project somewhat correctly. But for now, what we're going to do is switch the mapping type to projection, or sorry, planar mapping. And then you see something a little bit closer to what you have. But now what you'll want to do is move the texture to where it actually aligns with your image. Another thing that you might need to do is flip it around in order for it to fit with the original object. So this. So this is really the only sort of annoying part of this workflow. Generally, it works pretty well, but it just takes a little bit of messing around with. So I'm going to go ahead and click the check mark on it. And I'm going to scale it up just a little bit more. So back into material graph, size and mapping. Scale it up slightly. To where it lines up approximately. So yeah, there's a few things I still want to adjust about this, so I'll go back into the material graph, move the texture a little bit more. But generally speaking, I'm pretty happy with how this is looking. More. Yeah, nice. Oh, that's not what I want. And I think that's probably just about good. Check. And now you can see the sort of three-dimensionalized image pretty well here. So I'm going to continue adjusting this slightly till I get it exact, but if you guys have any questions, now would be a good time to ask. Yeah, that's pretty nice.
Would you generally place another displacement or like a bump?
One more time, sorry.
Would you like generally add another displacement through Keyshot and or a bump as well, or?
Yeah, so this is just the very basic like planar mapping version of this. Generally, what I like doing is actually like if I'm like once I see this and it's like, okay, this is a viable object, then I'll go in and start with a like a base texture with a bump map of stone or whatever sort of material that it's most similar to, and then I'll go in and like instead of the diffuse map on that, I'll input this original map, so you have a little bit more control over what you want produced.
So you'd like merge like a curvature node and put in this map and then after like a brick map too?
Yeah, so like a lot of the time also what I like doing is using like a curvature node or an ambient occlusion node and
Okay.
darkening up the contours of it, and then using a color adjust to like darken the actual material up, like darken the actual diffuse map. So in this case, the original image, just based on the geometry itself.
Right.
But which is like a pretty sweet trick for Keyshot in general. But I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys some of my rendering preferences that tend to make these kinds of 3D objects look a little bit nicer. I'm gonna go ahead and also import my old one too, so it can do it like that. Yeah, I also really like this one that was produced yesterday. It's just sometimes on the fly, it's a little bit difficult to like come up with iterations that lend themselves to, I don't know, I keep saying lend themselves, but like produce cool results. Let me quickly go through the material process again. So once again, material graph, pick the image, which I believe it is this one. You'll see that it is, oh, that's actually pretty nice. So the reason that it mapped automatically to it is because the bottom and the side fits the extents of the original image. So it like scales to the extent of that. And then the reason the sides look the way they do is it's actually box mapped rather than projection mapped. Now, projection mapping stays a little bit more true to the original object. So you can see here the difference between the two. Yeah, so projection mapping stays more true to the original object. But you'll see, especially if you do sort of like the flatten base option in Houdini, it gives these like striations or streaks on the side that aren't super desirable. But with box mapping, you got to think how much you displace the original geometry, and whatever is on that side will reproject onto this. So planar mapping results in a nicer face, but a little bit weird edges. Box mapping produces weirder edges, but nicer texture overall, as you can see in this one. So let's do a few things to just like make the images a little nicer. So a few Keyshot hacks that I'm sure a lot of you guys already know, but I think it's just good to sort of put out there. First of all, I almost never render with basic lighting. Interior is my go-to. You can already see like the image quality of that is improving dramatically. It just gives a little bit more accents to a little bit more contrast, and just a little bit better of a lighting scheme in general. And then in environment, if y'all want to open up your browsers and go on to Polyhaven, I'm not entirely sure, but I think I have it on the tutorial links here. Yeah, Hdri Haven. Yeah, there you go. So if you go to tutorial links and then Polyhaven, you can browse HDRIs. You're able to output, you're able to scroll through a bunch of different lighting environments. I think in this case, what I like generally doing is seeing where the sun is located relative, like in the sky, and just thinking about the object and where I want it lit. So let's find one with the sun a little bit higher than that. Let's try a Gothic manner. Yeah, it's a little bit. So yeah, again, the criteria that I'm looking for is just like a direct source of light and an environment that isn't going to conflict directly with the object that I chose. So 2K is fine. Make sure it's HDR instead of EXR, and just download it, and it will download directly onto your downloads, just as whatever its name is with the resolution right next to it. From there, go back into Keyshot and open up. So go into Hdri Editor and then open up your startup Hdri and the file node here, change it into Dry Cracked Lake or whichever HDRI you chose. And you can see this is a lot more of a realistic sort of lighting environment. It looks super strange anytime like the HDRI is actually like visible, like as anything more than just a like lighting environment. So I go into settings, color, and then just change it directly to a white or whatever sort of background that you want. Generally speaking as well, I don't really like to have ground shadows on. The only thing they really help with is determining the sun angle.
But they're really cool, I gotta say. I mean, I want one of those. How can I buy one? It's really cool.
It's a lot of fun. I mean, the workflow it yields really like pretty cool results. I mean, they are granted a little bit 2.5D in some cases, but the output is pretty nice considering how like consolidated of a workflow it is. Yeah, so the ground shadows, just turn them off in environment. And then the last thing that you need to think about, right, is, okay, how do I like emphasize the contours of this object like a little bit better. What I like to do is go back into the original image, and there might not be a sun since it's like AI generated, but regardless of anything, generally you can find sort of a like a light or like a lighting angle from the image. And I'll try to actually match that lighting angle to the angle of the HDRI light source. So you do that in settings, change the rotation to where it approximately matches the object's original light source. And it, of course, from object to object, it'll differ. But yeah, that's just what I like doing. But yeah, that's about it. I would really like to see some like the people in the panels results and renderings eventually, but also since I plan on making the sort of animation of everything, it would be great to have OBJ files from this, so you can just click on whatever object, export to OBJ, and just upload it to the drive, and it should have the stuff internalized, or the materials internalized. And then yeah, that just about does it for this workflow. I'll open it up to questions now, and also if anybody wants to show what they've got, that would be pretty awesome.
Shane, I had a few questions I put on your on the chat, and then a few questions slash comments from YouTube as well, because we have following pretty much all over. So just, I think just 4 to start.
Let me see the chat real quick.
It starts with a question from 9:58 a.m. I'm not sure if you went through that or not, but
Okay.
then after that.
Okay, yeah. 9:58 a.m. If we have 4 facades, can we generate a geometry with all 4 of them, like a building? Yeah, actually, absolutely. There's so that sort of refers to another 3-dimensionalization technique that a few people I'm pretty sure Matthias uses it a little bit, and I've used it in the past. I call it shadow boxing. It's just a few different terms for it, I'm sure, but essentially, let me see if I can. My horrible drawing skills will be exposed, but if you imagine a little isometric box, right? And then you have a figure that is extracted from this angle, right? Let's do a house, for example, and a figure that's extracted from this angle, which would be a little bit more rectilinear, and a figure that's extracted from this angle, right? What shadow boxing does is it takes these 3 like X, Z, Y, Z, and X, Y planes, traces whatever black and white mask that they have, and intersects them to where the output of this one would be, you know, a gable or something like that, right? Now this can be adapted to this workflow in a pretty straightforward manner, just by doing this exact same thing, except offsetting the like each individual face using this technique. It gets a little bit more complicated than that when you're actually going in and resolving the corners of it, but that sort of as a basic thing is pretty good. And that is also sort of something similar to what I'm working on now. Geometry. let's see. It's not so much. Extrude on the axis. Okay, so to answer 1018, so the presentation geometries were actually produced through the voxel stacking technique, and that was covered, or like the first portion, I'm assuming, of the presentation geometries that I think you're referencing, that was produced through the voxel stacking technique. And if you have access to this drive, the GANS 2D to 3D tutorial will actually cover that workflow. Now it's a pretty cool thing, but it has some pretty severe limitations as well. And then I think I already answered Ronnie's. The drive will be open indefinitely, and I'd like everybody to submit by sort of the end of the week this week.
All right, just to make sure also, we're putting down the OBJ with the textures and the images?
Yes, so
Right.
that way, in case like there's some misalignment in the textures, I can just go in and reproject.
Okay.
Shane, there's another one from the YouTubeverse. Oh, I think somebody put that on. Oh, Virginia did. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. The viability of this in like sort of the realm of reality, it's like, sure, as a design tool, this is super interesting, but like it doesn't lend itself super well to any like given construction method other than really like CNCing or carving or even 3D printing. I think the like contemporary construction methods are a little bit behind the sort of the geometries that we're producing, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think as we like go on, like there will be some like play with that, and that sort of goes back to the big difference between the practice and the discipline right now is like, imagine trying to fabricate this facade. I mean, like I have at a very small scale, and it's a lot more complicated than a brick building, but yeah.
Similar to the YouTuber's question, I really think that as we see the metaverse as a way to live with each other and like communicate and expand our field, I think this would be like a metaversion version of the city, maybe like this AI generated, data driven sort of stuff, you know. And I'm currently like doing some research in this field, and I was wondering like your point of view about this, like this metaverse. It's something that many people are talking about in different ways, and I was wondering what you think, like the possibilities of this kind of workflow inside this, not another way of living and inhabiting the world.
Yeah, no, that's a really great
So,
question.
hey, Shane, so when are you going to put your own company to make super metaverse cool worlds?
Well, let's see. I got my I got my Oculus right here, so we'll see. But in terms of the metaverse, I do think it's a super interesting concept, and whether or not like we'll sort of just see where it goes. I personally can't wait to just, you know, leave this fleshy vessel and upload my consciousness. But like there right now, I think the reflection on this is like this current workflow is not at all meant for the real world. And that's not really my specific interest. It's more of just like a means of how can we create geometry from these AIs and create workflows that sort of foster new projects and sort of new explorations onto this. Like I do think construction methods are worth like consideration, but like you were saying, like something like this would look great in the metaverse, you know. And I've already had like the A+D one object at a time exhibition. It wasn't these objects that we're showcasing, but other ones, and yeah, it was pretty fun, and all sort of in VR.
Shane, do you have any opinion about NFTs and crypto art or currency with what you're doing? Is that something that you think we could follow up as an option for young architects and designers?
Yeah, I personally am not all too into NFTs or really just like crypto in general, like as of right now. But I think there is a value to this kind of thing. But like I'm not super not necessarily not well versed, but like not super into selling my stuff like in that format right now. But I do love, I mean, like I've been following people since I was in like, I don't know, 6th grade or something. And I think that sort of form of art distribution is pretty awesome. But yeah, and it should also be noted that if you want to do this kind of thing, make sure that you're doing it through the right sort of copyright guidelines as sort of detailed out in the collab script.
Oh, thank you, Shane, for that statement of responsibility. I definitely support that. Just wanted to bring your attention to the chat. There's another for your opinion from Mahmoud Edelsoki. There is actually a plugin to import from Houdini to Grasshopper and vice versa. Have you used that plugin, and would you recommend us using it, or is it in beta? I have not used it myself.
Yeah, I don't know exactly about it. Like currently, I maybe have heard about some sort of pipeline between the two. Currently, my workflows aren't like I can do anything in Houdini that I can do in Grasshopper. So generally, I don't. It's mostly Rhino to Houdini, but I would highly recommend if there is any sort of consolidation to be done, I'm for it. You know, especially for workflows. But yeah, and also what we were talking about yesterday with recommendations for some tutorials. A lot of these names I will probably butcher the pronunciation of, but I'll add a sort of tutorials folder to this. But Intagma's really great. Doxia Studio for Houdini is really great. Junichiro Horikawa, one of the best in Houdini. Joris Boutonniere is, once again, one of the coolest people I've ever worked with. And I think he has some Houdini tutorials out there. Best person I've ever sort of seen operate the software. And then for Grasshopper, I mean, I wouldn't like some Parametric House and other ones are pretty good, but Gediminas Kardinkas is like pretty phenomenal and does some pretty cool and obscure stuff on his YouTube channel, all of which I will try to post by the end of today on the drive. Oh yeah, and also just make sure to like if you guys post screenshots of this sort of workflow, make sure to credit Jamie Respondek. I don't think she has an Instagram, but just I'll type her name in the chat just because she generated that original image. But yeah, any other questions? I'm super down to answer some questions.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could give some insights on how we could like automate this kind of workflow so we could batch produce some images. For instance, I would like to use like this data from the city. And so like images, like live images from streets, you know, and in some way they could actually be transformed into geometry in your like workflow. I was wondering if I could do that. Like if you ever done something similar or something that you could like you wouldn't need to do one by one, you know?
Yeah, so that's actually really a good sort of segue into one of the things that I was exploring with this, which is, and you were talking, I'm pretty sure it was you, about the metaverse and everything. One way to, let me clear out the house that I drew, but am I able to clear that out? Okay, there we go. One way to actually like utilize a very similar workflow but adapt it directly to VR would be like a lot of the workflow is pretty limited to the aspect ratio of the image, but if you're actually able to get like panoramic views of the city, like whatever aspect ratio slash image type that the Oculus VR gets, then you're actually able to run even videos through this script via image sequences and do this exact same thing, but in a fully immersive three-dimensional way. Of course, it's still, rather than the like being perpendicular to the z-axis, it would just all sort of be going towards you once it's reapplied in a VR headset. But I think that could be a super cool exploration, if that makes any sense.
So
Yeah.
Shane,
Sorry.
no, Susanna, no, thank you. Shane, I just wanted to, after you fully answer that question, I just wanted to bring your attention all the good thoughts from YouTube, but also there were some observations as well. So Susanna, did you finish your question fully, or did you have any more insights?
Yeah, no, sure. It's a huge field, and I didn't think of it like you described it, and it gave me some thoughts and ideas. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'd love to see what you produce with that. Oh yeah, and Ronnie, do you prefer using Keyshot over a plugin like Redshift? Okay, so this is like, I don't know, rendering softwares, I'm kind of like in between a few right now. Keyshot is my favorite object-based rendering software as of right now. And I get that you can consolidate it a little bit with Redshift. It's just like, in terms of my workflow right now, it's just a little bit easier for me to do object-based renders in Keyshot because I interface it with Rhino like all the time. But a lot of the VR stuff that I'm doing is almost exclusively in Unreal. So the pipeline between Houdini and Unreal is pretty nice as well. I'd love to share a few notes on Vdb Workplace. Yeah, and also that would be great. If you have me on Instagram, then just shoot me a DM, and that would be awesome.
Shane, one follow-up question about this. what do you see the future of, because I know you're entering into graduate school, like what are you interested in doing, and how do these tools really help you kind of formulate a thesis, or just understanding kind of how you're thinking about, the next 5 or 10 years for architecture in general and these type of tools?
Yeah, it's a super interesting question. And if you like ask pretty much any person like that's in sort of a similar position to mine, they get really frustrated, as am I, with the like frustrated and excited with the rate at which these things are moving. So it's really difficult to say, oh yeah, I'm just gonna get really good at VQGAN and that's gonna be my thesis, right? Or really good at Disco Diffusion, or I'm gonna be the best mid-journey artist out there. And that's like really not what you can rely on, because I'm sure in a few months that something completely revolutionary will come out. But what I do really like want to capitalize on is, with new tools coming out and with sort of more more control that you can have over the pre-existing tools. I want to have a lot more of an interface between the inputs and also the creation of the workflow that you can do to three-dimensionalize these things. And that just the creation of these sort of pipelines is what really interests me. And I'm also interested in real like 3D neural nets that aren't, like they aren't all that great right now, but yeah, working within constraints and then just constantly adapting is sort of, well, I guess my answer to that question as to what I'll do for thesis.
Shane, one last question. Since now that you're part of this global dialogue on, I would say, kind of AI, image making, form making, what are you looking for also in collaborations too? Like, are you going to specialize in a computer language like C++, C#, or are you going to look at other types of new programming paradigms so that you can accomplish your research and push the envelope even further? That's one question. But two, what kind of collaborators are you looking for? Like scientists, computer scientists, researchers, artists? Like, what do you want to do creatively that challenges your version of architecture in the future?
Yeah, that's really an awesome question, because like more so now than ever, like the architects are really going back to like becoming the sort of Renaissance men and women that they once were, and not necessarily out of anything other than necessity. So my goal is to be, obviously well versed in a lot of things, but some of the collaborations that I've done thus far that have been really successful have been with like engineering majors or visualization majors that bring entirely new skill sets to this specifically. Like the best example of this would be like the class that I co-taught at A&M with Gabe Escobar. It wasn't an architecture, like it wasn't open exclusively to architecture students. In fact, most semesters that we taught it, the majority of the students weren't, which presented a whole array of technical issues, but also a really like rich and diverse like amount of skill sets to pull from. So we have a pretty good visualization program at A&M, and it feeds into Pixar. So having Viz majors work on, rendering and different workflows, and then having the engineering majors do the coding, and just people like doing what they're good at is like all you can really ask for. So that was, I think, part of the reason for the success of those classes. But in the future, I think working with, you know, data scientists and like fabricators would be pretty amazing.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you, Shane, for your generosity of your time and all the talent and all the passion that you show, because obviously this is a lot of energy. So I really appreciate it. And I would encourage everyone to follow Shane online, to really support his work. Hopefully he can put out some artworks that we can, you know, try to get him a new motorcycle and, you know, trip all over the world or even out of space. Who knows? Shane is young. Just wanted to say that we're almost at the hour, and I think this is your ship to navigate. So I think all the questions have been answered that I know, but I'll give it one more look.
Okay, sounds good. And if anybody in the panel wants any closing comments or questions, that would be great. But yeah, no, it's been super fun. I'm super excited to see what you guys do with this.
Thank you again, Shane.
Yeah, of course.
Hey Shane, thanks a lot for the new insight on how to three-dimensionalize it. Prior to this, like I mentioned yesterday, I was in another workshop for the 3D GAN, and it's nice to see different ways into three-dimensionalizing these images that we produce with the GAN. It's great. Yeah. Thanks.
It's been great.
Shane, here's some things from YouTube. Thanks, Shane. Great work. We'll love to share notes with you on VDB workflows in Houdini, and that might be of interest to you and your research. A lot of people that are very positive and very happy that you did this. So you have hopefully many new fans at the door. So thank you, Shane.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you again. It was great seeing you in action, because it's something that actually it's not really, yeah, you don't have like one single path to do it, and you definitely show a viable one. So anyone can like actually do what you did, like with your tutoring. It was really, really nice. Thank you so much.
Of course, yeah, I'm happy to help.
Also, I just wanted to say before we sign off today is that if any of you are interested in joining the Digital Futures group, organizing events, or just supporting tutorials like this one from Shane, I mean, I think that what Shane has done today is very eye-opening and very rewarding, and we only want to continue this hard and good work. So so Susanna, it seems like you're very active. You'd be one of those people that I'd hit up, but anyone who's interested, please. Any final words, Shane?
No, I don't think so. Thank you, Gustavo and Virginia, and the entire Digital Futures team. It's always super awesome and a really great experience to be given this platform. I'd be more than happy to come back next year and teach another one on hopefully even cooler stuff.
We'll keep you to that promise, Shane, and a beer.
Yeah,
need to get that ride. Well, thank you all. Virginia, I think it's you.
Yep. All right. Thank you. Just as a heads up, we do have other events every Saturday coming up. So please keep following our social media to find out those lectures, talks, and tutorials. So thank you all. Have a good day.